Okay, Liana, will you start recording? Okay. Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's training on speed and data management. The session is being recorded, so you can refer back to it later for a refresher. You've all been given a document with the formulas and tools we'll be covering. This provides a brief explanation of what they're used for and how they work. There's also an Excel workbook, which we'll be going through and to demonstrate some of these tools. This is going to be quite useful to refer back to later as well. So now there are many handy shortcuts as well as formulas and tools in Excel, but we're only going to focus on a small selection of some of the most useful items that will save you time, help you become more efficient and productive, and help you unlock the power of Excel. The key here is really to learn and utilize the ones that are going to assist you most. And as with anything, practice makes perfect. So the more you use these tools and functions, the more familiar you'll become with them and the more comfortable you'll be and increasing your skills. So as we are limited with time, I'm going to go through these items fairly quickly. You can ask questions towards the end of each session. And then you've also got the workbooks that you can refer back to later. So let's jump in. Okay, I'm going to share my screen quickly. Okay, can you all see that? Right. So the first section that we're going to cover is speed. Now, to increase speed, we need to utilize the keyboard and its shortcut keystrokes. So the first part of this is moving quicker around and between workbooks. So let's move in. So here I can see the first one is Control Tab. Now, if you've got the workbook open and you hit Control Tab, it's going to move between all open Excel workbooks. I'm sharing my one screen. I hope I'm sharing everything. So I'm pushing Control Tab and a blank workbook 2 should come up. Again, Control Tab, blank workbook 3, and then Control Tab, and it moves back to the main workbook. Okay, then the second shortcut is Alt Tab. Now what Alt Tab does is that moves between any open programs. So if you hold Alt and click on Tab, you'll see that it brings up a toolbar and that shows all your open documents. And while you're holding Alt, you just hit Tab and then that will scroll through any open documents. I'm not sure if you can see it on the screen I'm sharing because it's on my main screen. But if you give it a try, you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, so that takes us to moving quickly around a workbook. So now if we use control and directional arrows, it will take you to the beginning or the end of a data set. And I'll show you now. So I hit control and then I'm going to control up and that moves to the top of the data set. Control down moves to the bottom, control right. And if I hit control right again, it moves to the very end of the workbook. So we've just covered like 1,000 rows in a second. Obviously, you don't want to go to the very end, but this is how it works. So it assists greatly in speed instead of hitting down every time like that. So if you want to move around, control and directional arrows. Another shortcut to know is the control end function. So what this does is it moves to the very last active cell on a workbook. So if I control and end on your keyboard, now my last active cell is V77, and you can see it takes me there. And then the next one, on some keyboard setups, it might be control function end. It's just depending on how you've got your keyboard set up. So try either control end or control function end, and it will take you to the end of your workbook. And if you want to go to the beginning of your workbook, you go control home or control function home, and that takes you right to the beginning. Okay, so that's moving around a workbook quickly. Then the next one is control page down and page up. And you'll see at the bottom of the workbook there are a number of tabs, and this will cycle through your tabs. So control page down and it moves tabs to the right. Control page up, it will move along your tabs to the left. Okay, so this brings us on to data selection. So now I want to move down here. So shift and directional arrow allows you to select cells in a workbook. So I'm holding shift, right directional arrow, and you can see I'm selecting those cells. Left, down, up. Okay. Now we're going to use a combination of control and shift, which allows us to select data ranges. So instead of just going shift down, 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 let's say you've got 1,000 rows and you want to go through it quickly, you go control shift and down, right, and then it selects the entire data range. The other thing you can do is put control A, which selects the data cells and ranges that you're currently working in. So you can see the little block that we're working in is the data selection, and Excel knows that we're only dealing with that portion there. So the first time you hit control A, it will select the immediate data range. And if you hit control A again, it will select the entire workbook. Okay, the other way to quickly select cells is to use a combination of your mouse and keyboard. And you can click on the cell, hit shift, and then click on the very end of the data range, and that will select everything in between. So that's shift and left mouse click. If you just want to select a few individual cells, so I just want to select that cell, this cell, and that cell, you hold control. And then you can edit the cell or copy and paste and do whatever you need to do there. So we're going to move on to data editing. Now, a very handy trick in Excel is the F2 key, and this will activate the cell and allow you to edit it. So you can either double click or F2. So F2 takes you into the cell, and then from there you can edit it. Now F4, I'll explain this a little bit later, but when you're working with formulas, this applies an absolute reference when you're dealing with a formula. So just to demonstrate here, I'll go equals that cell. So now that has put a formula in there, and I still want this, if I want to copy paste this down, I still wanted to refer to this cell here. But if I copy paste that down, it copies the formula. So you can see D22, then D23, so it moves. I don't want that when I'm copying and pasting. I want it to always refer to that. So if I go into the formula and I hit F4, you can see that dollar signs appear between before the column and the row. Now this locks the column and the row into that cell position there. And then when I copy this down, it always refers to that cell. So that's the absolute reference. You see, it's always going to be D22. Okay. Another handy key in Excel is the find and replace function. So if you're looking for something and you've got a large data workbook and you're not sure where it is, but you know what you're looking for, you can go Control F, and I'm looking for replace. So there we go. It takes me straight to replace, and I can see where we are. Okay, now the other one, if I want to actually replace that, is you can click on replace and type the word in there. But to speed that up, you can push Control H. So you can see it immediately takes you to the replace function. So I want to find replace and say replace, please. And then you go replace, and then you can see there it's found replace and replaced it with replace, please. Now, it's anyway. So that is a quick data editing overview. And then these functions here, we've gone over it in the beginner training, but it's really handy to use, and it should be part of your everyday Excel use. So Control C, it's copy. Control V is paste. Control X is cut. I'm going to paste it there again. Let's say I pasted that in the wrong place and I want to undo. So instead of clicking on the undo button, I can click Control Z, and then that will take it back to the previous state. Now, if I realize that my undo was incorrect, I can redo. And again, instead of clicking redo, you can click Control Y, and then that will redo the move you've just done. Now, Control Z, undo, and redo will allow you up to about 10 undos. So you can see undo, undo, undo. You can see all the functions that have happened and what we've done. I want to go back now to where we were with the Control Y, and there we are. Okay, so then the next function is to duplicate the cell above. You can either, it's just another way of copy pasting, but specifically if you in a column and you've got a range that you want to copy, you hit Control D, and that will copy the cell above it. You can also select the range and hit Control D, and then that will also copy the formulas above. Now, one of the things that is quite useful is the paste value function. Usually to paste, you would copy. So the long way of doing it is right click, copy, right click, paste values. There's a quicker way to do it, and you just go Control C, which is copy, and then Alt E, which brings up the menu, special, and V, and then hit enter. And then you can see there that has applied where there was a formula before, it has now pasted the formula as values. So if you've got a formula and you don't want to paste the formula and make things go wonky, you can just paste the value, and that's how you do it. So let's just do it again, Control C, Alt E, S, V, and paste. Okay. So let's go there. So these are some of the most useful and easy to remember keyboard shortcuts. There are many more, but this selection is going to provide you with the key core and most of the functions that you'll likely use on a daily basis. Okay, next we come to data viewing. So when we're looking at a set of data, freeze pane helps us keep, excuse me, freeze pane helps us keep an area of the workbook visible while you scroll to another area of the worksheet. So I'll show you what we mean here. So I'm going to go to the next tab, Control page down, takes us to sales data. Now you can see I've got all my headings here in row 2, and if I scroll down, you can see that by freezing the pane, the headings remain there. If I didn't have a freeze pane on and I scroll down, I wouldn't really be able to tell what all this information is by the time I get to the bottom of the worksheet. So in order to freeze the pane, what you can do is you go view. Yes, that's it. Thank you. You guys know it. So I've added all my shortcuts up to the quick ribbon. So view, freeze pane, and then I'm just going to unfreeze that. So I'll show you what I mean here. If I go to the end of the data sets, I don't know what data I'm dealing with. But if I go here and I freeze pane, I will then be able to know what everything is. Okay. Then another very helpful function is a split screen. So if you've got 1 or 2 screens, or you just want to put a data workbook next to another page or something that you want to compare with, there's 2 ways you can do it. By using the keyboard, you hit the Windows key and the left up or down or right arrow, but let's go to the left of the screen, and that will split the screen here. The other way to do it is if I grab somewhere on the toolbar and I move to the left, you can see as it hits the left of the screen, there's like a little bubble explosion. You release that, and that will then resize your screen. So because I've already resized this, it's not doing what I'd like it to do. But there when you do that, there should be a selection tab that comes up that allows you to select which data workbook you'd like to view side by side. For some reason, it's not doing it. When you try, you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay. So this leads us onto the quick ribbon. So sometimes you just want to click a button, and it's often easier to perform a command this way. Most of us will have only a handful of comments available, and then this is where the quick ribbon comes into play. Some of your most utilized commands can be placed on the quick ribbon, and this prevents us having to click the correct menu and search for the command, as I did just now when I clicked on data and I was looking for freeze panes. It's not there, so you can waste quite a lot of time doing that. View freeze panes is over there. So in order to put your favorite commands up in the top in the quick ribbon, find the command that you want, right click on it, and then say add it to quick access toolbar, and we'll see that that command then pops up at the top here. Now you can reorder this, or if you don't want it there, you can just right click and remove it from the quick access toolbar. Okay, now some functions and commands aren't available on the menu up here. So you're going to have to, for example, like the paste special and paste values. So here we'll need to know how to add it in. So on the workbook, it's got a little demonstration of where to go. So if you go File, Options, Quick Access Toolbar, and then you've got the selection of all the available commands that you can choose from. So popular commands, commands not in the ribbon. And then if you just want to select everything, you go all commands, and then you find your relevant command. The one command I like is the paste values, which is, it's already in my quick access toolbar, so it's there. So if you want to select something, you just select it, add it into the quick access toolbar, and then it will appear up there. So I don't really want that there, so I'm just going to remove it. And then from here, you've got access to all your commonly used functions. So I like to have sort, wrap text, and freeze panes. And then if you're not sure what they do, you can just hover over it and it'll give you a quick explanation. Right. Okay, and then that brings us to the end of the speed section. So we have a few moments if anyone has any questions. Okay, everyone is speedy. Excellent. So I'm going to move on to data management. Okay, and data management is really where you can unlock the full power of Excel, and you can see the information that you are requiring. So we've broken it down into two sections, and the first section is the formulas, and the second section is the data manipulation tools. So let's go through the formulas first. We spoke earlier about absolute references. Now this is where we put the $ in front of in front of the column and the row, and then that will lock that cell in place. And when you're copying and pasting, it will make sure that the absolute reference remains on that cell. Okay, we can go through that when we're dealing with the SUMIF and VLOOKUP. Okay, the next thing that we're going to deal with is the if statement. So this is a very useful statement, and it checks whether a condition is met and returns a value of true or false. So let's say you're doing a bank recon and you want to see all the payments and receipts. You can use the if statement to say equals if positive, return the number, if negative, return the other number, and then you can split your data like that. So I'm just going to go to this tab here. So for example, okay, so yeah, you can see that I've frozen my pane, but I haven't showed row 1. So I'm just going to unfreeze and then I'm going to refreeze here. So let's see if I want to return sales that are less than 2,000. So instead of manually going through the whole list and looking for all the sales that are less than 2,000 and going equals that plus that and manually doing that, you can just create a little column on the right and say if G3 is less than 2,000, then return G3 or return naught. And then once I've copied that, once I've made that formula, I can then copy that all the way down, and then it will provide the answers there. So it's now selected or returned all of the cells that are below 2,000. So this is quite handy when doing an analysis. Okay. The next function we're going to go through is if error. So this is often used in combination with other formulas, for example, the VLOOKUP. And what it does is if there's an error and it returns an NA or like a div naught. So if we try to divide something by 0, it's going to return, let's just do that. If we try to divide that by, so let's divide that number by 0, it's going to return a div error. So if you've got a range of formulas and you want to add up all your formulas and it's got a div naught in there, your totals at the bottom aren't going to work. So if you put an if error, it will make sure that that doesn't happen. So if error, there's my value, J9 divided by M9. And if there is an error, I want it to return a 0. And then the 0 returns. The other thing is that you can also put in text. So I'll put in true, and then that will return true. But most times when you're dealing with an if error, you're most likely to want to use a 0. That will return a 0. Okay, so now I get on to some of my favorite formulas. So we've got the XLOOKUP. Now the XLOOKUP is a new lookup function that's only available in 2019 onwards. Its predecessor is the VLOOKUP, and that is available in Excel prior to 2019. We'll go through both of these. So what the XLOOKUP does is it searches for a certain value in a column, and in order to return a value from a different column in the same row. So let's go do an example. So I've put an XLOOKUP in the cost of goods. So now let's say you've run a sales report, you've got your products, you've got your sales price and the quantity and the total sale, but you don't have the cost of goods and you want to do a profitability report. So I want to look up the cost of product 1. So I've got my product data, or the products, cost price, sales price, and estimated profit per product is. And I want to return the cost price of product 1. So I'm going to use the XLOOKUP function. So let's hit F2 and it will take us into the cell. So we can see FLOOKUP. I want to look up product 1 and I want to look up product. I wanted to return the cost price in column B. So it's going to look up product 1 from column A and return the corresponding value in column B. And there you can see that it looks up product 1 from the product data table and then returns a 5. So I'm going to go through this equals X lookup. There's also the option to use the function formula, but for speed and efficiency, it's much better to type this out. So X lookup, what is our product we want to look up? Product 1. The lookup array is, and we are looking up product 1 from the product column. And it moves us onto the return array, and I want to return the cost price. Okay, we're not going to deal with these now, but what this does is if there is an error, if the product's not found, you can then choose like a 0 or another character to return. But in this case, we don't need to worry about that. So we've looked up product 1 from the column, and we're going to return the cost price. And there it is. It's number 5. Cost of goods is 5. And once you've done that, you can then double click on the little square at the bottom and drag that all the way down. So what you'll notice here is that I've actually used the columns as absolute references. Now this is a much easier way of doing it because when you dragging down, it's not going to run into issues. If, however, you don't use the total column to do your lookup and you actually select the cell range. So let's do this again. I'll show you what I'm talking about. And I just select that, which is where the products are. Return array. If you're doing it this way, the selection of your lookup values must be the same size as your return array. So A2 to A6 and then B2 to B6. If you select A2 to A5 and B2 to B7, it's not going to work properly. Okay, and then enter. Now it still returns 5, which is great for the first 5 products. But now what you'll see is if I copy that down, it then shows up these errors. And what you'll see is that as you copy it down, it moves the references. So A3, A7, A4, A8, A5, etc., until it gets to A7, A11. If you go to your product data, there's nothing in A7 to A11. And we don't want that to happen. So what we do is we will use absolute references. So here you can click on just by the number, and then you can hit F4. And that will lock that cell in place. And go to that cell, hit F4, and then that will lock that in place there. And then you got to do the same for this side as well. So because I've done the absolute references after the formula, you have to go through each one. If you do the absolute references while you're typing the formula, it will do both the column and the row at the same time. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I've hit F4 and it's locked those cells in place. Array. So now when I drag this down, it's going to have the correct data, and everything is still in the same place, still referencing A2 to A6, even when I go all the way to the bottom. Okay. So that is X lookup. If, for example, a product that isn't in our product data sneaks in. So let's say we introduce a new product, product 6 or product 7. That's going to happen. So with the X lookup, this is where the second part of this function comes into play. So if the lookup value isn't found, what do you want to return? So I want to return a 0. This match mode is by default the accurate value. You can also have it as a partial match. So if it doesn't find this exactly, it will return the nearest value. But that's, in all my years of working with Excel, it's not really anything anyone should ever do. So, and I haven't had any need for that. So if you don't find the product, I want it to return a 0. Okay, so that is the X lookup. Now, if we're dealing with a VLOOKUP, a VLOOKUP works in much the same way. So we're going to VLOOKUP, and many people still use this, and it's an excellent tool. It's just a little bit more data resource heavy. So same thing, I want to look up product 2. I want to look up the table array. So now with a VLOOKUP, we have to select the entire array that we want, including the column that has the answer. So I'm selecting A and B, and then the column index number is the column that's going to return the answer. So we're looking up product 2 from column A, and then we say column index 2 is the column that has the answer. Now, your answer might be in D or E, in which case you would select the entire range up to the answer column, and then that would be, for D it would be 4, for E it would be 5, etc. So in this case, it's in column B, which is column number 2. And then that returns a 10. Okay. And then again, if there's something that's not in there, that shouldn't be there. So I'm going to duplicate the cell above it, Control D. And then you can see it's looking up product 6 and returning 25, which is certainly not correct because there's no product 26. And it's returning the answer for product 5. So if you do that, it's going to throw off your calculations quite a lot. So in order to prevent that, we want to say an exact match or an approximate match. So if you type false, it will give you an exact match, and this is what you'll be using most times. So now we've put the exact match in, and now it says product 6 doesn't exist, and it's given us an error, and that's no good. So what we're going to do is use the if error to put a 0 here. So we've created the formula. It's often easier to use the if error after you've created the formula, because if you're going to try if error and then put the formula in, it just gets a bit tricky that way. So create your formula first, and then you can add the if error afterwards. So equals if error, open brackets, and then there you can see there's the value, there's the formula, and if your formula returns an error, I want it to return a 0. There we go. You can put a 0 in there. You can also, again, put text. So, and text is always entered with inverted commas. So you can see error, but it's often not good to put text, because then when I've got formulas there, it messes up the formulas and then creates other problems. So if you put a 0 in most cases, it will then flow through into your formulas and allow them to work. Okay. Right, the next item I'd like to go through is SUMIF. So SUMIF, it will sum up values based on a single criteria. Okay, let's go and do an example. Okay, let's say I want to sum up all of product 2 sales. So we're going to use the SUMIF. Now you can physically type in, so we want to look at product 2. Now you can physically type in product 2, or you can use a reference. Either or, it doesn't matter. But if you're typing it in, it needs to be exact. If you say product, let's say product 2 space, it's not going to return anything. So it has to be an exact match. So to get around that, it's often better to create a mapping table and have the exact cell reference. So in this case, there's my product and I'm looking up that cell. So how this works, equals SUMIF, the range. So the range is the product column. So that is the column that your criteria is in. The criteria is the actual item that you're looking up. In this case, it is product 2. So in this case, it's product 2. And then the sum range is the column that has the values that you want to sum up. So what this is going to do, it's going to look for all product 2s and then all corresponding sale items in column G, and then return the value here. So it's saying in this data spreadsheet, the value of product 2 sales is 45,237.50. Okay, so that's SUMIF. So that's if you want to do a single criteria. But let's say you've got a multiple criteria now, and I want to sum up product 2 sales for month 5. Okay, so now I want to look up product 2 and month 5 from this data set and then return the answer. So before we get onto that, I want to show you a quick trick. Often when you are exporting data from any accounting system, it just gives you the month. It just gives you the date. And that's not very helpful when we're trying to sum up the month of all these figures over here, because it will only return the individual date. So what we do is we create a month. So March, so we say equals month and A3, so it'll return the month value of this cell. In this case, it's March, and that is 3. And then you copy that all the way down to the bottom, and then it will return the corresponding figure for the month. Now we can use this, and we can use this in our formulas, and then we'll reference that month. So again, you can hard code in the value, but just be careful when you're typing it in that it is exact. So I prefer to use the mapping table. So SUMIFs, the difference here between SUMIF and SUMIFs is that the sum range is at the beginning. So the sum range is the column that has your values you want to sum up. SUMIFs can actually be used instead of SUMIF, and you only put in one criteria. Here are SUMIFs, you can have multiple criteria, but often the more criteria you have, the more tricky it becomes. So I like to limit it to 2, maximum 3 criteria. So how this works equals sum ifs, the sum range. So in this case, it's GG. Then the criteria range 1. When you're doing this, it's important to make sure that your criteria remain the same. So product is your criteria range 1, which is column D. And then the actual criteria is the product that you're looking up. Then, excuse me, criteria range 2 is the month. And the actual criteria 2, I've referenced it to be Z5. Sorry, Z6. And then that will pull all the information for product 2 in month 5. And then we can see our sales for product 2 in month 5 is 20,790 Rand. Okay, this brings us on to count if. So we want to maybe see the number of invoices raised for product 2. If I use a sum if, it's not going to work because this is a text, so it's not going to be able to sum up these items here. So this is where we use a count. And again, I've used a reference. So count if the range is D, and then the criteria is product 2. Now it's saying the number of product 2 invoices raised is 17. So that's gone through and counted all of those. Now, if we have multiple criteria and we want to say, let's count the number of product 2 sales less than 2,000, we can use the count ifs. Equals count ifs, criteria range 1, which is column D. So this is your product. The criteria, I've hard-coded that in, so that's product 2. Criteria range 2 is the sales, and then criteria 2. So when you're dealing with values in a count, you have to treat it as a text. And you can see I've treated it by putting inverted commas in the text function there. So I'm saying less than equals to 2,000, and it will then return the function. If I didn't put those inverted commas in there, give me an error. So that's how that works. And then again, you can also use a reference. Now, if you go in and type less than equals to 2,000, and sorry, it should be F2, not F1. You can also reference the cells much in the same way you did with the sum ifs. So this is now counting the number of product 2 sales that are less than 2,000 from the data set, and it's telling us that there are 6 times that product 2 has been sold where the total sale is less than 2,000. So this is very useful when you're doing sales analysis. Okay. So we've gone through all of these items, and the next function I want to show you is a subtotal. So a subtotal returns a subtotal from a list in a database, and this is particularly useful when you're using filters, which we'll get onto now. So I'm going to use this subtotal in combination with the filter. So we've got our set of data here. At the very end, we've got a sum total, which is your regular sum, and we've got a subtotal. Now, when everything's unfiltered, it looks the same. It's the same value, so there's no apparent reason why it should be different. But when you start filtering, things start going wrong. So in order to subtotal, we'll type in equals subtotal. Now it brings up this selection. So the key for sum is 9. So as you do this more often, you'll learn it. So you can either double click on that or just type in 9. So equals subtotal 9, comma, and then select your data range. So here I've used Control Shift and up, and it's gone and it's selected my entire range. And then close brackets and enter. And then that's the subtotal. Okay, so I'm going to filter by product 2. So click on the filter. So I've already put a filter in, so let's take this filter off. So in order to filter a range, you can click on data and filter, or you can, if you've added it to your quick access toolbar, you can click on filter. So it's quite important to make sure that you've got the correct data range selected. Excel is pretty good. It should know what you're trying to filter, but sometimes it doesn't always get the correct selection. So it's best always to just make sure that you've got your selection. So I'm going to go Shift Control right, Shift Control down, and then I've made sure I've selected everything I want. I'm not going to include the subtotal or total in my selection because I want that to show separately and not be filtered. And I'm going to put on the filter. So now I'm going to filter out and just select product 2. And this is where you can see how the subtotal function really works. So now there's my sum. It still says 347,000 because it's counting all the hidden rows in this data set. Subtotal, however, is only counting the visible cells. Another quick way that you can see the subtotal is if you select it on the bottom right, it'll show you the sum of the selected and visible cells and saying there's 17 here, 17 instances, there's the average, and then the sum is 45,000. But in most cases, you'll use the subtotal function, and then it will give you your answer. So it's a very useful function when dealing with filters and data manipulation. Okay. The other item that we're going to go through is sorting. So sorting is very helpful when you're looking at data and it's just a bit of a mess and things are all over the place. At the moment, it's sorted by month and by date. So I'm going to select all and filter there. You can do a sort by using the filter. So if I want to say, let's sort by product 1, it's then going to sort it in ascending order, and by product 1, then product 2, etc. But this is only one sort level deep. Now, if you want to go further into sorting and you want to sort it by product 1, then by date, we can do the following. Just make sure we select our data range. So when sorting, it's really important to make sure you select the entire range, because if you just sort one column and you sort, let's say, the date out of order, it's going to sort only that column and all this information is going to remain the same, but this is going to misalign and it's going to mess up everything. So when you're doing sorts, just make sure that you select the entire data range. And then we can say sort. We're going to sort. Now we want to sort it by month and add a level, and then by product number. and then that's smallest to largest and A to Z. So now what that's done is it's sorted it by month and by product. Previously we had it sorted by month and invoice number. You can change it if you like. Let's do it again. There we've sorted by month and then by invoice number. Okay, change that back to product 5. Okay, so sorts are quite useful. So if I've changed data, we can go back and do a sort by the original sort, which was by month, and then by invoice number. And then we can see that this should have been product 1, that should have been product 2. So sorting also highlights where there's potential errors in your data. So now I can see that there's a pattern here. All my sales are in ascending order, so that should product 2, and then that should be product 1. We've now corrected our data, and our cost of goods are correct, which means our profits is now correct, and our profitability report is correct. Okay, so let's say we want to see the total. We've performed all our functions. We've looked up the cost of goods. We've put in the total cost, and we've got our profit. And now we want to see what's the profit for the month of May. And then there's the information that we're looking for. So all of our sales, we've made a profit of 52,000 Rand. Okay, and that's a brief overview of filters and sorting. And then the last function that I'd like to go through, or tool that I'd like to go through, is the pivot table. So in Excel, all of these things kind of do the same thing in a different way. So a pivot table is basically all of these all rolled into one big monster. And you often don't need to use a pivot table if you just want to look up a certain item, and that's where formulas are come into play. But if you want to do a big data analysis and a pack, you can use a pivot table. So this is what we've done here. So what I've done is created a pivot table, and it's summed up all the profit for the month per product per month. So let's just go through that and how to do that. So we go insert pivot table. Now it's asking you to select your table and range. The table and range is in the sales data, so you can click on the top there and go down to the bottom, and now you've selected your range, and now you're going to add your information. Okay, so we want product. So if you click on a product, it automatically defaults to the row. If I add in anything, it automatically defaults to the row. We now want the month. Okay, so what you see here is if you click on the month, because it's a value, it thinks we're summing that up. So it's gone in and summed up the month, which we don't actually want. We want the months to appear in the columns left to right. So it's quite simple. You can either click and drag and drop it in there, or if you've already got it down here, you can just simply move it in between the various items. And I'm going to drop this into columns. And now we've got our products down the left, and then our months running horizontally. And then the last thing that we need to do is add in the value and the total profit. And there we've created a quick overview of all this information that's contained here. And we can see, well, there's the total profit for product one, and there's the monthly profits. Okay, so that's a quick overview. Now, let's say you've got additional information, and I want to see product per invoice. So I'm going to go in and you can either drag and drop it into the row, or you can just click it and it'll add it into the row. Now what this is doing, it's saying there's product one and there's all the invoices and then there's all the profit per month. Okay, now I don't want to see I only want to see product one. So here you can use there's a filter within the pivot table. So I can click on the drop down and I only want to see product one. And then there's my information only for product one. Now, I don't want to see all this invoice function, all this invoice detail. So I'm going to collapse it. On the left there's a little minus and a plus. So I click on that and then that will collapse that. So when using pivot tables, it's quite useful to have nested information that you can then drill down into it and then see what's underneath and have a quick look, and then you can collapse it again. Okay, and then I'm going to put all the filters back. And then there they are. So now what's happened is I've got product one, that's collapsed, product two, that's expanded. And I want to quickly collapse everything. So when you're dealing with multiple products and multiple nested situations, this is quite a handy function to learn. So you right click on the product and then you'll see here on the menu, there's an expand and collapse. And if I just put expand, it's going to individually expand that, which is the same as clicking this button. Now you can go through and click all of the buttons, but that takes a long time. So let's do it. Right click, expand, collapse entire field. And that collapses everything in the row labels and then brings it to the first nested item. And then similarly, so that's with rows, and then similarly you can do filters on the columns. Filter for month 3, select it all. I can also sort this if I want to sort it by 5 down to 1. You can sort it by descending, sort it by ascending. The other thing you can do here is also you can move various items around. So let's say I want to see product 4 at the top. 4, 1, 2, 3, 5, and you can move items around like that. Often what happens is if you're looking at financial data, and most financial years end in February, and you've used the month the month criteria, it says, let's just change something here quickly. So I'm going to change, I'm just going to hard code these, put in a couple of ones, a few twos. And then now we've changed the data in the pivot table. It doesn't automatically refresh, so I want to allow it to include the ones and twos. So I'm going to pivot table analyze and refresh the data. And there it's now put in 3, 4, 5, 1, 2. So in this case, it's actually done it the right way. But if in most times, okay, so we can do a sort. So sort smallest to largest. And they're sorted smallest to largest. Now, if I want to say move January and February to the end of the period, I can just click on those two cells and then drag it and then rearrange it. So now it's rearranged the columns March, April, May, January, February. Okay. And that really brings us to the end of our presentation. I've gone through everything quite quickly. So if there's any comments, any queries, any things we're not certain about, please raise your hand and ask, and we can go through and review some items. And also a reminder that this session is recorded, and you do have workbooks and the pack that you can go back to this and have a look at it anytime you want and give yourself a refresher on all of this information. So once again, this is just a handful of tools and formulas that we feel are most useful in increasing your speed and data management efficiency. So it's certainly not extensive, but these are probably going to be most of the items that you'll come into contact with. Right, so if there's any questions, if you guys already know all of the stuff, this is great. I'm super happy. But if you've got a question, don't feel shy, because if you need to ask something, there's definitely somebody else who's got the same question as you. And if you do want to ask something, just unmute yourself at the top right with the mic. Okay, so nobody's got any questions. I like this. You guys are all an excellent bunch of students. Thank you.
So I think that's the end of the session. We'll definitely send out the link, like John has said, to this, and as well as last week's recording. And if you do have any questions later in the day, please feel free to email us, and we'll respond as best we can. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Right, thanks everybody. We finished ahead of schedule, so I'm going to give you back some of your time, and thanks for joining everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, I think we need to go and sit with it, especially those Lookup and all that. Like, I also learned some stuff. You've got to sit with it and play and understand.
And that's it. So it's quite difficult to go through all of this. There's a lot of information here, and I've spent, so with my team, we spend quite a lot of time. Like the functions that we're going to use that we use most are probably the VLOOKUP, XLOOKUP, SUMIF. Yeah, those four. Pivot tables to a degree. Definitely filters, definitely sorting, and it takes a little bit of time to grasp it, but once you understand how it works and what it does and what you're looking up, it becomes a lot easier. And with everything, practice makes perfect. Yeah.
So there is error.